1222nd day of war. More and more European voices urge Trump to apply the principle of peace through force to Russia after Iran. The Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said what she said about this with the American president. Russian offensive has been stopped in the Sumy region after the Zetniks recently began to recognize this and inform analysts. Such statement was made by the head of the ECU, Syrskyi. At the same time, he recognized the problems that were with the fortifications in the direction. The stabilization of this section of the front is also confirmed by the Ukrainian military. However, they note that they cannot do without problems. However, the situation in the South Donetsk region has intensified, where the Russian military is moving forward. DeepState reports that the situation looks pretty bad, and that often Ukrainian commanders from there send false reports about the control of certain settlements. The operation of the pipe ended with a pipe for many of its participants. Anastasia Koshevarova reports on this. According to her, Russian soldiers who crawled through the pipe in the Kursk region now have serious health problems, but no one wants to help them, including the defense. In a broader sense, this is expected of all Russian soldiers. On Channel 1, there was a broadcast about the reintegration of the heroes of the Soviet Union back into society. But I think it will be closed soon because the former soldiers on it say that they are not taken to work, their past career prospects were buried by the army, and now the maximum they can count on is the work of a career. About this and much more in today's fresh summary, which you can support with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions. You can support the channel financially on Patreon, the link is in the description. I think that we, together with patrons, will watch this program from the first channel. Well, that is, there will be a closed stream for patrons. Finally, what is called content has appeared, therefore subscribe to Patreon and buy NVPN. This is a means to bypass blockages, which helps to bypass blockages, with the help of which you can watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, blocked resources, Discord, and so on. The purchase and use of NVPN and any VPN in Russia is still legal. You can buy it by the link in the description, and thus you support this channel. Well, we move on to what happened in the past 24 hours. The allies are hinting at Trump that it is time to unwind the situation not only in Iran. The solvency as a situation with Iran must be manifested, and for the achievement of the ceasefire in Ukraine, said the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. I talked about this with the US President Donald Trump and repeated in my speech at the plenary meeting that the same resolution as in Iran is necessary to achieve two other important ceasefire. One in Ukraine, where Russia, it seems, does not want to achieve progress, and quite the opposite, the second in Gaza, Meloni said in a briefing after the NATO summit. The IAEA summit could not make a joint statement on Ukraine. You probably already guessed why, but just in case I will explain. During the European Union summit in Brussels, a joint statement in support of Ukraine was not accepted due to blockades from Hungary. As a result, the text of the document was only applied as a supplement to the final decision, which was supported by 26 of the 27 EU member states. The main position of the document is a call for an immediate ceasefire with Russia, a new package of sanctions against the EU, including the peace against its shadow fleet, confirmation of the allocation of 30.6 billion euros of Ukraine's aid in 2025, the recognition of the progress of Ukraine on the way to the EU membership. According to informed interlocutors of the RBC Ukraine, the removal of the Hungary veto should not be expected until the elections in Hungary, which will take place in the spring of next year. So most likely at this time, the Ukrainian EU will activate the technical work, in particular, the implementation of the relevant reforms in Ukraine. However, the formal progress of the opening of the negotiating clusters is not yet to be expected due to the position of Hungary. However, we have already seen many times how the position of Hungary can change back and forth, depending on the upcoming elections and the pressure of the EU countries. But in any case, again, we will not get tired of repeating that this problem must be solved. The problem of Putin's vassals in Europe, which in every way contradicts the common solidarity policy of the European Union. Z-channels have spread the video of the fire of military trucks manned in German Erfurt. Zetniks stated that the fire was committed by our people or unknown benefactors. Moreover, some claimed that the machines were allegedly intended for the Soviet Union. However, there is no evidence of this. The signs of belonging to the Bundeswehr are noted on the machines themselves. The Russian Cross, a kind of troops of communication accepted by NATO. Bundeswehr numbers, starting with the letter Y. What is characteristic here is not only that Russia is leading a direct war with Europe and is already destroying the equipment of the European armies, and even not that this very equipment is protected in almost no way. The site of the fire was geolocalized. It turned out to be an ordinary car serviceman, where military trucks were almost hand in hand with civilian trucks. Apparently, despite the promise of the previous Chancellor Olaf Scholz to increase the combat readiness of the Bundeswehr, they are still outsourcing the repair of automobile equipment to civilian car services. It is necessary to assume that in order not to contain its own repairs and divisions, the plan, as they say, is reliable like a Swiss watch, especially in the event of a war. After all, as you know, in the Svalbard corridor between Belarus and the Kaliningrad region, car services man are equipped literally at each crossroads. If anything, this is sarcasm. Not to mention that in the event of a war, such car services are not only spread throughout Germany. Once again, I emphasize that no matter how much you want to think differently in Europe, the war with Russia is already going on at the initiative of the Kremlin. Attempts to close your eyes on this will not lead to anything good. North Korea can send additional troops to Russia to participate in the war against Ukraine in July or August. Reuters writes about this with a reference to the intelligence of South Korea. According to this intelligence, against the background of sending reinforcements, Russia can prepare for a new large-scale offensive. Here, of course, it should be noted that this is the largest scale offensive is already going on, and moreover, it is in many places, and North Korean soldiers would help to reanimate it. But if they are really sent in July or August, then they will most likely not be able to play a decisive role in the offensive, or will be thrown into battle without any preparation and will become an easy prey for Ukrainian drones. However, this fact should not be underestimated, as it's considered a decisive matter. Sending of North Korean troops to the Kursk region was a formal use of the soldiers of another country within the territory of the partner country, that is, on the territory of the RF. The entry of the NDR troops into the territory of Ukraine, at least formally, should cause a serious response from the countries of Europe and the United States. How it will look in reality is unpredictable, especially because of the figure of the American president. Last time when the North Korean soldiers took part in the war, the Ukrainian troops were given the right to fight with Western weapons on the territory of Russia. Moreover, in fact, the North Korean soldiers did not play a decisive role in the Kursk region. Let me remind you that the key role was played by the Russian drones, which cut the way to supply the LSU group in the bottleneck of the Sumskaya and Kursk regions. But it all depends on the number of soldiers that the Pyongyang can send. If we are talking about thousands, it is generally not to be taken into account. If we are talking about tens of thousands, it is already more serious. If we are talking about hundreds, it can have a serious impact on the war. Therefore, we are waiting for the details. In addition, the Pyongyang continues to deliver weapons to Russia, reports the intelligence service. In exchange, the RF probably consults the DPRK on the launch of satellites and missile launch systems. In any case, the main guarantee of the strength of Ukraine is its army. Therefore, we continue to assemble for the brigade in the Pokrovsky direction. We have already almost finished it. There's very little left, but nevertheless, there is still a lot left, so I remind you of the address from the military.
Ми військовослужбовці розвідувальної роти. Виконуємо бойові завдання на Покровському напрямку. Для успішного виконання бойових завдань нам необхідно 2 автомобілі пікапи, 2 кросових мотоцикли, так як наша техніка швидко виходить з ладу. Сподіваємось на вашу підтримку. Слава Україні!
Here is the QR code, link to the QR code to the monobank, link to the monobank in the description. There is PayPal, there is cryptocurrency. Thank you, by the way, Sheik, for the invitation. There's very little left. I think today we will definitely finish this meeting. And thank you very much to everyone who participated, who will participate today, who participated in the past meetings, who will participate in the future. This is really a real action that helps to save specific people, specific defenders of Ukraine, who, in turn, save ordinary citizens of Ukraine, peaceful citizens of Ukraine. Because they are usually these military who do not fight for their own will, but because Russia wanted to destroy their country. But I remind you, if you are in Russia, then you should not donate to the Soviet Union because this is a direct criminal composition, and adequate people are worth the weight of gold, and much better they will be free than in prison. Well, we move on to the Ukrainian blow. In the evening of June 26, the Ukrainian forces struck the Bryansk region, reports channel Dnipro Asingarbaz. In the Fajin district, an oil supply point was attacked and the Transneft product oil plant southwest is on fire. The reservoir is on fire, he wrote. If we really see the consequences of the Ukrainian strike, then the moratorium on strikes on Russian oil infrastructure is apparently cancelled. Finally, which, in principle, began to feel about a week and a half ago. Also, in Ukraine, they told about the next strikes with long-range FPV drones aimed at the occupied Crimea. This time, the strike was carried out by the PVO S-400 complex, which had previously been hit by expensive missiles from the KMS Nodada Center from the project Cyberbarashno. This is what GUR wrote about their successes. Primers are returning. GUR fighters are hitting enemy PVO systems in the Crimea. The Primer's Special Forces drone, which in Ukrainian means ghosts, of the main intelligence department of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, consistently continue to weaken Russian air defense during the occupied Crimea. Video footage of combat operations on the critically important and expensive components of the PVO S-400 Triumph complex. 2 multifunction radar control systems 92 N2E were hit by a reconnaissance strike. 2 RLSs of detection 91 N6E were detected, the launch system of the S-400 complex. The channels doubt that the launch was successfully hit, but without the RLS it is still useless. This is noted in the HUR. Radars are the eyes of the enemy PVO system. Without them, the anti-aircraft systems become unbeatable. The armed struggle continues. Glory to Ukraine, they write. Also, from an interesting channel, Parapax brings footage from Russian social networks, where the consequences of the blow to cross the Ida River on the occupied Lugansk region are shown. It is interesting here that Ukrainian channels noticed at the site of the blow the fragments of the corresponding Ukrainian drone missile Peklo, presented to the public in December 24. Thus, we have the first confirmation of the use of this ammunition. Meanwhile, there were details of the next Ukrainian attack on the Russian railway logistics in the occupied part of the Zaporozhye Oblast on June 25. The head of the Occupation Research Center, Petr Andriushchenko, who reported the new strike on the train, promised footage of the operation, but they were not shown yet. However, there was confirmation of its information from other sources. The VSU again attacked trains in the Zaporozhye Oblast, reported Astro. The movement was stopped at the site. On June 25, the VSU attacked the unmanned aerial vehicle on the outskirts of the Big Takmak in the Malchansk or Lytopol region. According to Astro sources, 40 semi-cars were transported from the occupied Volnovakha region to Crimea. As a result of the attack, the engine compartment of the locomotive was lit. The train arrived in Malchansk, where it was continued to be extinguished. Movement on the site was stopped. At the same time, 6 unmanned aerial vehicles attacked the locomotive on the Big Takmak station. The train transported steel, sawmills, construction mix, and containers. As a result of the attack, a high-voltage thermal chamber of the locomotive was lit. The brake line was also damaged. One employee of the Ministry of Internal Affairs was injured. The Russian military and 42nd Guard Infantry Division at the same time showed how drones were knocking over the locomotive in the area of Takmak. The details of the previous blow to the train also led to the channel of the spy file, which finally woke up. On June 21, 1925, a BPA attack on the railway echelon was carried out in the field of fuel in the area of the Malchansk settlement in the Zaporozhye region. The strike was carried out using 14 BPA-9, of which it was possible to knock down. BPA-9 of the plane and quadcopter type was used. As a result of the first strike, the railway crew stopped. It was decided to unhook 19 wagons, which continued the attack of the BPA-9. 4 cisterns burned out. Also, 1 BPA-9 struck Nila's car, which accompanied the crew. As a result of the strike, Sergeant Byterov TV and Junior Sergeant Tuyev ASH died. They reported on the Insider channel, which had been silent for more than 1.5 months. Now let's move on to the line of combat interaction. Head of the VSU, Alexander Syrskyi, visited Sumchina and stated that the offensive of the enemy in this direction was managed to hold. In general, this is true. He also indirectly admitted to the problems with the fortifications and protection of drones that existed in the direction of which Ukrainian military analysts have long spoken, and promised to solve them. This is what, in particular, the commander wrote. As a result, in May and June, it can be noted that the current wave of attempts of the summer offensive of the enemy from the territory of the Russian Federation in the territory of the Russian Federation is being taken in the same way as last year, than an attempt of offensive actions of the enemy. In Kharkiv, China failed. On the contrary, the decisions that were previously made by us have already resulted in the promotion of the Russian troops at the border of the Sumy region this week. The line of combat contact has been stabilized at certain areas. Our units successfully apply the tactic of active defense and free the Ukrainian land at the border of the Sumy region, said Syrskyi. In the north of Slobozhansk and Kursk directions, we again tied about 50,000 of the personnel of Russian armed forces, including elite brigades of their VDV and Marines, are offensive. Actions in the Kursk region of the Kursk region caused the enemy to overthrow a part of the troops to defend their territory. This significantly reduced the offensive capabilities of the main group of the enemy's troops in the Samsk direction. It is noted by the head of the command of our group in the north of Slobozhansk direction. A special group on the issues of defense of Sumchina, cities and villages of the region was created. The first stage tasks of strengthening defensive structures, the development of the system of engineering and fortifications are also assigned a duty officer who will be directly responsible for the preparation of cities and villages of the region for defense, and for the effectiveness of the system of engineering barriers in the likely directions of the enemy's offensive. The deputy is appointed. On the issues of engineering and fortification equipment, I analyzed the real situation of the case directly in the fields and forests, inspected the direction of the fortification, including the one who is responsible for OVA and DSSD. The work continues, but it should be accelerated, taking into account the requirements of the modern war, Syrskyi wrote. The establishment of additional fortifications, the construction of the kill zone organization, the construction of anti-drone corridors to protect our soldiers, and the supply of more reliable logistics to our troops are obvious tasks that are being performed. The effectiveness of these tasks should significantly increase. During the established term, I will return to the Czech, Syrskyi wrote. In fact, this is a recognition of the problems that there are with fortifications in this direction. Better late than never, but it would be better, to be honest, much earlier. The stabilization of the line of combat contact on the direction is confirmed by the Ukrainian military, which writes in the telegram under the nickname Officer. In the Sumy region, he writes, the enemy's advance is really stopped at the moment. We have a stable LBZ. The enemy's advance has been stopped thanks to joint action of the combat units. It cost a lot of effort, I will tell you. At the moment, the Russians are still trying to return the recently beaten Andriivka, but unsuccessfully. In Unikovka, counterattacks continue, the Ukrainian military fixes. Nevertheless, in the Sumy direction, not everything is going well for the defense forces. According to Stanislav Bunyatov, the Ukrainian military officer, another weak link in defense was one of the 150th Brigade, which was recently formed, and the formation and use of which was associated with many problems, sometimes even scandals. One of the 150th Brigade, which recently arrived in the Sumy direction, has a low level of combat ability. The interaction between the battalions and the general training, Bunyatov writes. The Russians are well informed about the weak sides of this unit. They periodically execute the captives from its composition and have a certain promotion in the zone of responsibility of this brigade. I hope that the command will conduct a corresponding check, find out critical shortcomings, and take appropriate decisions regarding the leadership of the unit, instead of focusing on the criticism of my post, Bunyatov concludes. For the delay of the Russian offensive in Sumchina, Ukraine uses, among other things, controlled air bombs, including Western production. In the video of the 2nd Assault Battalion of the 225th Separate Assault Regiment, which the project Urarkivka is located in the recently occupied Kondrativka, the arrival of 2 air bombs was seen in the buildings where the Russian military had established themselves. Now we turn to the Southern Donetsk direction. As soon as the direction in Sumchina ceased to be the most dangerous for the defense forces, its place was taken by the Southern Donetsk region. In the growing crisis in this section, they are told in deep state, in fact, they are on alert. With the participation of the already former tactical group Ugledar, the defense of Peshetinva and SREF continues to collapse rapidly. They achieve significant progress. Starting from Alexievka and up to the green field, the Russian forces are conducting constant assault actions, attracting a large number of infantry. The situation in the settlement of Alexievka and Bogatiri is clarified. Also, the Russians actively exert pressure from Zaporozhye in the direction of Zyrka. They attack in the area of Kamara and actively bring infantry there to try to completely capture the village and settle in it. There are constant assaults in the area of Shevchenko, Vilnia-Polya, Novoselko. The unpleasant thing is the fact that the TGR Ugledar was distinguished by the frequent submission of inappropriate reports, indicating the holding of some settlement or just individual positions, but this situation does not get any better. The next update of the map will be unsettling, warns DeepState. As we have discussed many times in general, the Russian tactics can be described as follows. The Russian army is trying to pressure everywhere to find weak points in Ukrainian defense. When this is achieved, reserves are sent there to increase the pressure. Then the Ukrainian Defense Force is sending reserves to extinguish the fire, and so on. Serious changes will occur in one of 2 options. First, the Soviet Union stabilizes the entire front line, which can be achieved just according to the plans for the construction of the drone line, which, in particular, was told by the new head of the unmanned forces, Robert Mader-Brody. According to him, each drone operator will be fixed at their own site and not play the role of fire teams, which will increase their efficiency and ensure the stability of the defense line. The second option is that Russia will break through some weak point and enter the operational space, leading there to the reserves intended for this. Actually, this is the dream of the Russian leadership of the Zetniks for 1.5 years, until it has never been realized. In the Zaporozhian direction, according to the same deep state, the Russians have advanced in Kamyanske on the left bank of the Dnieper River. Fights for this settlement have been erupting periodically since last year, and Russian armed forces continues to feel Ukrainian defense literally in all areas in the hope of finding any weak point. A counterattack of Ukrainian armed forces took place in the Lyman direction, because now we can confirm this for sure, as a new confirmation of the Ukrainian counterattack in the Lyman direction was received from the Russian side by the forces of the 3rd Assault Force. I told you about this counterattack in yesterday's report. This is what the Z-War blogger Anatoly Radov writes. Unfortunately, the information from the Ukrainian side is rarely confirmed. Ukrainians attacked and fortified the western part of the village. At the moment, the fighters of the 488th and 283rd Regiments are trying to counterattack and knock out the enemy. Even if the counterattack does not allow to interrupt the course of events in the Lyman direction, it will at least slow down the progress of the Russians, who are already forced to restore their lost positions instead of moving on. In the era of the social network war, maintaining specific settlements has a much greater importance for the Russian command than the situation on the front line as a whole, because the information about the control over a certain village is spread much faster than, for example, about a successful attack on any, even the most powerful fortified area. Now let's move on to the Kupyansk direction. An unstable situation is noted there. This is the Kupyansk direction where the Russians are trying to advance to Kupyansk from the north. This is told by the Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel Officer. In the Kupyansk direction, he writes in the area of Kondrativka, the situation has sharply intensified. The enemy has a promotion to actively use sabotage intelligence groups. He writes that he promises to provide detailed information later. Considering the last advance of the Russians in this area, it is possible that the Ukrainians will soon have to defend Kupyansk itself, which in turn will put a threat to the Ukrainian airfield beyond the river and a shrapnel to the east of the city. the Russian military continues to become the prey of Ukrainian drone operators. The fact is that the Ministry of Defense does not provide them with the necessary drone detectors, which allow them to detect flying FPVs and hide, and the fact that the supply of such devices is on the shoulders of Z-volunteers. Just such volunteers told a heartbreaking story. The soldier with whom they transferred the detector simply did not have time to bring it to his coworkers. The result is a destroyed Ural truck, 5 seriously injured and 1 200th, which burned down in this very Ural, and also a small portion of Ukrainian units for new drones. Congratulations to them. Meanwhile, in the field of optical fiber drones, which do not see any detector, Ukrainians still have to catch up with the Russians. The same author of the channel Officer on Optical Fiber, we still remain in the role of catching up with the Pishitin. In short, the Russians already have a variety of drone models, quite interesting technical solutions, tactics of their use, and generally piloting and PV drones of this type. We now have the following situation. Drones with coils from the state come in little. And what comes in, frankly speaking, is not of the best quality. And because there are few such drones, they are very rarely used by pilots, so there is no necessary practice, which is extremely important for such drones. It turns out that there is no one to fly and there is nothing to fly. Yes, it is funny and sinful. Actually, there are 0 promising models, there are 0 scientific research developments, there are 0 practical courses. Commanders, wind the fiber yourself. The officer advises by the forces of the unit, and as soon as your pilots get their skills up, you will buy normal equipment just once. The percentage of the marriage will be about 5–10%, then, as usual in the troops, 50%, because there is no high-quality product, no practice. The price of the question is 3 times cheaper than on the market. This should be mastered by each brigade and have at least 3 crew on site, trained exclusively for optics, and then you can start creating problems for the enemy, big problems. According to the script, I hope to be tested on experience, I hope to reach someone at least, and at least 1 unit will begin to do this. Then the minimum task of this post will be completed by the Ukrainian military. Well, I hope that the new head of the Unmanned Systems Force, Robert Motter Brody, will closely monitor what is happening and knows about these problems and will solve them. Well, not only him, of course. It's strange to rely on one particular person, as it was with Drapat, as it is now with Brody. But in my opinion, the role of a person in history is often overestimated, but the role of a person in a particular war is often underestimated. With Russian long-range BPA, problems also increase. Ukrainian Air Force has become worse at intercepting Russian drones. If in November 1924 only 6% of the BPA launched in Russia hit the target, by June 25 there were already 16% of such drones. During some night attacks, almost half of the drones had beaten the Ukrainian PVO, as reported by the analysis of the Associated Press. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the drop in the effectiveness of the PVO against drones led to an increase in the number of BPA launched by Russia, changes in the tactics of Russian military and new technologies, says the Associated Press. After the inauguration of Donald Trump in January, Russia sharply increased the number of used drones. Even more intense Russian attacks began in March. Now at night, Russia can launch 300–400 drones. Within the framework of the new Russian tactics, Moscow launches drones either very high without the reach of Ukrainian shooters on the ground or low to avoid radio detection. Russia also sends 2 planes with several waves. The first of the false targets is overloaded by air defense, the next waves strike the targets. In addition, technologies are being improved in the drones used by Russia. Last week, Ukrainians for the first time intercepted a drone equipped with radio communication for control from Russia with artificial intelligence, which allows the device to act autonomously in case of loss of communication, says the Associated Press. As the expert agency Elektronika Syrskyi Bezkrasnov said, the drone was equipped with 8 antennas instead of 4, as on other BOPs, which complicates the electronic fight with it. Ukrainian specialists in a conversation with the AP assumed that Iran had transferred the new drone to Russia for testing in combat conditions. But this could be indicated by the stickers found inside the device, similar to the standard Iranian marking system, and the unusual white color of the device. Fortunately, Ukrainian state military officials finally realized the problem. They began to seriously invest in the production of interceptor drones and training of pilots under them. Vladimir Zelensky in particular talks about this, and some European countries have already invested in the production of anti-aircraft drones. So in the fight against technology, Ukraine will not give up so easily. We hope that the statistics will improve again, but it should be noted that the decision has been made late again. This is an unfavorable luxury for Ukraine. It can and should win, but if it is faster, more flexible, and more inventive than Russia. Another stage of the exchange of prisoners, the number of exchanged military personnel, as we are already used to, has taken place in Istanbul. The Ukrainian traditional headquarters told us about the last exchange. Today was another stage of large-scale exchange of prisoners in accordance with the agreements in Istanbul. Traditional headquarters on the issue of handling prisoners of war. Under the command of the President of Ukraine, returned to the homeland a group of defenders aged up to 25 years old, as well as defenders who were injured and had health problems. The soldiers of the SSU returned to their homeland, in particular representatives of the Navy, land forces, assault troops, forces of territorial defense, as well as a fighter of the National Guard of Ukraine and the State Border Guard. The overwhelming majority of the liberated defenders today were in captivity for more than 3 years. A significant part of them were captured during the defense of Mariupol. Especially from today's exchange stage, it was possible to return home young soldiers. The youngest defender is 24 years old. He was captured during the defense of Mariupol in April of 2022 at the age of 21. It was also possible to free the National Guard guards from captivity. The oldest guard who managed to return home is 62 years old. The Kyiv police told about an unsuccessful terrorist attack organized by the Russian special services in the capital of Russia. The method is the same: to recruit young people on the internet and look for easy money. Such methods are also used by Ukrainian special services. However, it is noteworthy that the Russians are just looking for random soldiers, apparently not having the opportunity to approach a higher-ranking military or volunteer. So that's what the Kyiv police wrote. Recently, a soldier turned to the Kyiv police and said that the unknown people were trying to blow him up with explosives that had been put into his moped. According to him, he came to date and had to take the keys from the entrance to the trunk of a moped parked near his house. When he approached the vehicle, an explosion occurred. There's a video of this incident so we can see everything. He was clearly saved by the fact that at some point he changed his mind and didn't get in. He just turned away from this moped. Operatives of the Criminal Investigation Department of the Dnipro Police Department in Kyiv, together with the SBU employees, have cooperatively established the person of the victim. The victim was a 19-year-old resident of the Kyiv region. According to the investigation, the young man was looking for work on the internet through 11 Telegram channels. He was contacted by the SBU representative, who promised a money reward for performing sabotage actions. The first task is to eliminate the military of the armed forces of Ukraine. According to the courier's instructions, the guy bought a moped in which he manually installed a homemade explosive device and took it to a specific place. At the same time, representatives of Russian special services created a fake page on the social network where the girls established contact with the Ukrainian military. Subsequently, girl, in quotes, invited the man to visit. In order to get into the house, he had to take the keys in the trunk of the moped. When he came up, the device worked. As a result, the military did not suffer. After the explosion, the young man received a new order to set fire to a military car in Pryluka. The law enforcement arrested him immediately after the set fire in the order of Article 208 of the Criminal Procedural Code of Ukraine. No reward the criminal did not receive. At the moment, the defendant is suspected of Part 1 of Article 258 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, of committing an attack, namely an explosion, which created a threat to the life of a person, committed in order to violate public safety according to the prefabricated agreement of the group of persons. Sanction includes up to 12 years of imprisonment of freedom, confiscation of property, or without such. What can I say here? Dear Ukrainian military personnel and ordinary people, keep in mind that Russia is not able to get to the high-ranking Ukrainian officials due to the poverty of its special services. They tried, but nothing came out of them. Therefore, it is you who can become the desired target. And no matter who you are, a simple ATB or ordinary army employee, you will be declared a NATO general if you are able to be eliminated. This is due to the fact that after the successful elimination of really important Russian officers, the Kremlin is very angry that they cannot carry out a diversion of the corresponding scale. Therefore, be extremely careful, minimize new acquaintances, treat everyone with suspicion, do not take other people's parcels, do not approach other people's equipment. I ask you about this through the internet, people you don't know personally. Also check your vehicles. There is a war going on, and your enemy, Russia, has no principles and does not know how to beat effectively and point-wise, so it will beat everyone in a row. This is especially true of Ukrainian volunteers and public figures. Right now, except that you are on the list of goals, this does not mean that you should be afraid. This means that you need to understand and cope with risks. And please, I ask everyone to give up on the idea of whom I need. This is the most harmful, the most divisive, most stupid idea that always leads to terrible consequences. Many people need you. Many people can make you a target. Keep this in mind, take this into account, and take measures to ensure your own safety. If you have any doubts, you can ask Syrskyi Sternenko. I think he can tell a lot more on this topic. This investigator Jomp studied Russian armored vehicles repair factories, which are engaged in restoring and storing, as well as repairing such machines as BMP combat vehicles, BMP armored vehicles. BTRD, BTR-MDM, wheeled armored vehicles of the BTR family, MTLB trucks, motorbikes, and armored reconnaissance vehicles. That is, almost everything except tanks and BMP. Total, according to its calculations, these machines are restored and produced at a speed of 1,095 1,400 units per year, including 2550 BRDM2, 100 motorbikes, 220-300 paratroopers of various types, of which 12150 are new. Production and 75950 BTR, and most of the latter are new BTR-82A, of course. As the supply reserves are depleted, the volume of supplies will decrease, but even the current ones, taking into account the losses, are clearly not enough to satiate the army with armored vehicles at the level of some close to the military. Therefore, the Russian military continues to send infantry assaults. In one practice in one of the units, the wife of the military told about the limit of such Russian commanders. They literally find legends, and most often these legends are pure truth, taking into account how many different sources confirm them. Previously in the channel Don't Wait for Good News, they published information about the Chief of Combat Training of the 127th Infantry Division Valery Yasin, nicknamed Savile. Then it was reported that Savile sends soldiers to true death, insults the subordinates, and applies physical force to them. One of the subordinates, Valery, clarified that he put 2 regiments, the 394th Infantry Division and the 114th Infantry Division, and after that he received an increase. The wife of a military officer who served under the command of Savile told how he, together with other commanders, sent soldiers to the death, openly declaring that they are meat and no one will return alive.
Сказали, вот, звоните родственникам, пускай они заказывают гробы, вы обратно не вернетесь, вы мясо вот 200. Столько выживать 2,5 года, и тут какие-то штурма, и в один конец еще не стесняясь об этом говорят.
Родственники военнослужащих, которые проходили службу в этих полках,
Apply for help in the search for missing soldiers. According to them, the men were sent to the assault without support and refused to evacuate the wounded. The families do not receive any information and the volunteers ignore and block their requests. The volunteers began to be afraid. They deleted all the messages. We do not even have time to take screenshots because the command scared them. Knowing the order in the Russian army, it is not surprising that by the end of May 25, 20,662 cases were filed in the Russian military courts about the refusal of the service. The media read on the basis of these court sites. Most of the cases were filed under the article on the voluntary leave of part. Also, the military is persecuted for not fulfilling the order and deserting. At the same time, the plaintiffs have already been sentenced to 17,121 cases. In January-May of 1925, 4,350 cases were filed in the Russian courts. According to the listed articles, there are 2,355 cases in Ukraine. It is important to note that in the Russian army, detainees are often punished without trial and trial, sending them to the pit and mocking at them, which I talked about in a separate video. Also, unfortunately, there is no open information for Russia about the total number of criminal cases filed for refusal of service in Ukraine. Such cases are counted as tens of thousands, however, some of them are closed before the court, if the military is voluntarily returned to service, or if, for example, it is nullified. Therefore, we are talking about tens of thousands and 20,000. This is only the lowest assessment of what has passed through the court and all that. In reality, this is 3 or 4 times, obviously, more numbers if we are talking in principle about the number of prisoners and deserters, which the prisoners themselves constantly write about. Here is a bright example. Russian military sometimes try to avoid punishment for refusal of service. The rather radical ways in Udmurtia, a military deserter shelled the policeman and fled into the forest. In one of the police stations in the Glazovsky district of Udmurtia on June 25, a group of security guards tried to detain Evgeny Kytilin, who was on the wanted list. He was a military officer. He was charged with a criminal case of voluntary leave of the unit. According to the master, when the security guards approached Kytilin's house, he opened fire and then fled into the forest. About 100 security guards were sent to search for the military. In 2 hours, Kytilin himself left the forest, shelled the police officers who were involved in the clashes and fled again. After 15 minutes, he was found in the forest and detained. Kytilin's gun turned out to be a cold revolver. Previously, the man was sentenced to illegal possession of drugs. I can only advise Russian deserters not to wait for the arrival of the police with a revolver or a beast, and turn to the forest where you will be helped to leave the country. But if you do not want to, then do not live in the place of registration and grab something more serious from the army with you. Against the background of desertion and the loss of the ranks of the Russian army in Ukraine, they are trying to replenish in all available ways. In Russian military units, soldiers are still forced to sign contracts, says Syrskyi. At first, the commander acts by contract, then they scare them with an imaginary criminal, sending them to meet storm. Some are trying to persuade them to enter a military training institution. Disagree, beat, isolate from communication with their loved ones. Parents who raise the noise warn, there is no I, otherwise the sons will have problems. But the problems begin just after signing the contracts. Pretty quickly, the latecomers are on the front line and in some kind of meat assault. Syrskyi talked to the callers' mothers. One right now is fighting for the son of the cheat who was forced to sign the contract by the cheat. The second one could not dissuade the child from signing the contract and recently buried him. Several women who first decided to talk after a while refused to comment on Verska and frightened the commander of the military units. "I don't want to sit down for 15 years, I'm already threatened with prison so that I remove everything," said one of them. "During the war, we watched enough videos from the front line where Russian soldiers die, apparently not hoping for evacuation or being afraid of being captured. Now one of the Russian military did the same, but first of all, pre-launched a stream that was going on for an hour. He shot himself in the chin with his own machine gun, but apparently did not hit the brain, so you have to live with a bullet in the jaw." They do not say anything about the motives of the military, but apparently the lives of Russian fighters really turned out to be worse than death, at least for one of them. The Russian state, in turn, very quickly defeated those whom it itself appointed as heroes. The military who received a rupee in the framework of the pipe operation in the Kursk region refused paid rewards. This was written by the Kremlin propagandist Anastasia Kashvarova, according to her words. Military who, as part of the stream operation, passed through the pipe Gazovaya Magistral in the Syrskyi district. A week or so later, paid compensation of 100,000 rubles for the cancer of the lungs and did not give any rewards. In the hospital of Kursk, the fighters were diagnosed with acute bronchitis of a medium severity. They threw 100,000 rubles at the dogs and the participation of the fighters. This pseudobronchitis has already passed into the cancer of the lungs. She wrote, "All who were in the pipe were beaten by the lungs. The fighters were suffocated. Someone has already died." But the most painful thing is that their illness is either not classified as a military injury or not classified as a serious one. They are not supposed to be paid. At the same time, they are all doomed and have received a serious injury of lungs. The payments are not supposed to be paid and died, as they died not from a combat injury but from lung cancer or TELA, thromboembolia, lung arteries, or, as initially put in the hospital, from the island of Bryansk. Kshvarova was also outraged that not a single fighter received a reward for the operation of the pipe. "Why is this? Why did you approve the pipe? Why did they sacrifice? What are you doing? Guys did it, they came, they were doomed. And you, in your position, we didn't send them there. No payment, no reward." Yes, this propagandist also claimed that a part of the military died in the pipe from suffocation. Earlier in Yekaterinburg, a copy of the gas pipe was restored in Kursk. Putin stated that not a single military unit which took part in the military maneuver of the subservient should be forgotten. "It should not be remembered that the members of the operation, Silent Sap, were discharged from the heroes," said military blogger Yuri Podolyak, writing the following. As local journalists found out, the LOS General Staff, which was not involved in the planning of the operation of the pipe, finally concluded the results of this phenomenal military operation, presented it in a somewhat different way. According to his version, this very operation of the pipe was just a distracting maneuver and only indirectly influenced the outcome of the battle. The main role, however, belonged to the other, undoubtedly valiant LOS army units, with all the consequences coming out of it. "It's good that we have Russia, not LOS, and it can't be like that with us," he mockingly says. "It can't be, I'm not mistaken, right?" he writes. "By the way, we shouldn't disagree with the Russian General Staff for some time now." If we look at the situation from the point of view of the Ukrainian command, then in the conditions of non-stop strikes, logistics attacks along the entire perimeter of the Kursk square, half-breaths of pipe climbers walking in the rear, it could be considered as a maximum additional unpleasant factor. Actually, the rapid retreat of the Ukrainian troops from the region began on March 8, on the day of the pipe operation, which means that the decision to leave Kursk was made not later than March 7, that is, even before the operation. This could have been influenced by the threat of a physical cutoff of Ukrainian logistical routes, which arose due to the breakthrough of the Russian forces at the southern border of the Syrskyi. You can remember the details by watching my video about those events. And in fact, this operation of the pipe was not needed at all. It was burnt by the Russian GZs, which they began to pipe. At the exit from the pipe, the Ukrainian military was waiting for the Russians. They fired them well. That is, there was a lot of loss from the Russian side, so yes. Well, that is, the pipe is the most ridiculous operation that was in general during this whole war. One of them. And well, the earth is warm to those morons who climbed into this pipe and thought that they needed their state. Zetniks again, well, this is because the so-called heroes of the SWO turned out to be unnecessary to anyone, writes the collector of Zetniks, Ivan Filipov. A wonderful sketch from the life of the new elite on the air of the first channel, and the veterans of the SWO cry that they do not take part in the war, they have to work as couriers. On the Russian federal channel, they showed a story with a courier who said that after the SWO, they stopped considering him as a candidate for the job, commenting on this channel Belorussky Silovic. With his words, he now had to hide that he is a defender of the motherland, and in fact, they are ashamed of this. If this is true, then all this is happening in Voronezh region. He writes, it's just that the SWO does not guess in the South Front channel. On the federal channel, they showed a story about the veteran of the SWO who received several rejections when he took part in a special operation. The issue of the resocialization of the new integration of the veterans of the SWO in a peaceful life already penetrates even the federal channels, noted the two major. In the story, they talk about a veteran who refuses to be born due to the fact of his participation in the war. They're probably afraid the war, albeit not soon, will end, and it would be good if state programs of assistance to veterans work not only in reports, but also deities would think about this topic. Still remember that veterans with combat experience after Afghanistan and Chechnya, without finding themselves in peaceful life, were often forced to act on the law to self-realize. This time, there will be much more such people, including two major, and here they are completely right, because this is already happening. I tell you about the killers and rapists from the new elite in almost every report about what will happen after the end of the war in Russia with these heroes. We have also told you several times that these will be new gangs and that we will send you there and so on. And when, the prisoners begin to be destroyed in a specific area, it's all bullshit. That's all, but really, the PTSR fascist occupants are not needed in Russia. They are all despised, no one wants to communicate with them, and so it will be. And indeed, hundreds of thousands of Russian military with combat experience, with the PTSR, with hatred for the state, because it means that it throws them away, they will return to the Russian society, and they will shoot right. And left, keep the markets, create criminals, and so on. Therefore, yes, it was clear from the very beginning. We started talking about this, in my opinion, a month after the beginning of a full-scale invasion. Therefore, why be surprised here? Well, I'm almost sure that the program on the first channel will be closed because this is an absolute discreditation of war, power, and everything else in the world. Well, I think that this issue that came out, we will watch on Patreon. Well, not on Patreon on YouTube, but for patrons. Because, well, I really like this weird Z content, and we have already watched on Patreon a film about an agents. And a REN TV report about something else. So I think that we will also watch this. Therefore, I invite everyone to Patreon, the link is in the description. Well, see you soon, all the best, bye.